Story 2. The Man by the Mile. Marker, we'd been driving for hours through the winding backroads of Appalachia, the fog rolling thick and low, swallowing the beams of my headlights before they could reach the pavement ahead. Tom, my friend since childhood, kept muttering about how the road felt longer than it should, like we were moving in circles, though I tried to brush it off as fatigue or poor planning. The radio had gone dead hours ago, static crackling whenever we tried to tune a station, leaving nothing but the hum of the engine and the faint sound of the tires on wet asphalt. Somewhere past midnight, rounding a particularly sharp bend, I saw him. At first I thought it was a tree stump or a roadside post, until the figure straightened and I caught the outline of a man standing rigid beside a mile marker, motionless, his back to us. I slowed, instinct telling me to be careful, thinking he might need help, though part of me didn't want to stop at all. Fog thickened around the edges of the road, curling in toward us like tendrils. "Do you see him?" I whispered to Tom. He squinted through the fog, then nodded. Yeah, I see him." The man didn't move, didn't even shift his weight. But there was something about the angle of his head that made my stomach knot. It was tilted unnaturally, as if he was listening, straining for a sound we couldn't hear. My hands tightened on the wheel. I felt the air grow heavier around the car, like the fog itself was pressing in, forcing us to notice him. As we passed, I stole a glance in the rear view. He didn't move. Not until we'd driven nearly a mile farther did Tom suddenly grab my arm. "Look," he hissed. I followed his gaze and my stomach sank. There he was again, beside a mile marker, the same posture, same tilt of the head, the same marker number. "What the hell?" I muttered, my voice small in the empty car. Tom shook his head, his face pale in the dim light of the dashboard. "We haven't turned around. I swear we haven't." I didn't know what to say. The road ahead twisted further into darkness, trees pressing against each other, hiding the sky. I tried to keep my focus on driving, but every bend brought a glimpse of him. Always beside the same marker, always the same pose. Every instinct screamed to stop, to turn around, to confront whatever it was, but my mind refused to let me. Minutes later, another bend, and there he was again. This time, as we drew near, his head slowly turned toward us. I could see his face now, pale as ash, mouth slightly open, eyes dark and unreadable. He looked like he was about to speak, to call out something I would have understood, but the words never came. The silence was heavier than the fog, pressing down on me from every direction. Tom leaned closer, whispering, "Drive, just drive." I pressed harder on the accelerator, the tires squealing lightly on the wet asphalt, fog whipping against the windshield. The man didn't move, didn't chase us. He stayed there, watching, as if measuring us, weighing the distance, testing our fear. We drove faster than we had at any point that night, hearts hammering, eyes flicking constantly to the roadside, expecting him to appear around every bend. Every shadow became him. Every sway of tree branches in the wind felt deliberate, as though he was orchestrating the darkness around us. The forest seemed alive, echoing with whispers we couldn't hear, footsteps that weren't ours. Hours passed like minutes. The road twisted and turned, but the mile markers all seemed to blur together. I kept expecting the number to change, to see something else, some sign that we were moving forward. Yet the memory of that first marker and that figure clung to my mind. The sun began to lighten the horizon in a dull, grey wash, and only then did the tension ease slightly, though the memory of him stayed like a weight in my chest. When we finally reached a patch of familiar asphalt, a main road that led to the nearest town, we slowed to a normal pace. I risked a glance to the roadside, and the figure was gone. No sign he had ever been there. The mile marker we had seen repeatedly stood as any other would, ordinary and weathered. No hint of the shadowed man we'd passed 3 times, no trace of his watching presence. Tom exhaled sharply, gripping the edge of the dashboard, face pale. Did that really just happen? He asked. I wanted to say yes to reassure him, but I couldn't. The fear hadn't left. It had simply faded into the quiet of daylight, leaving a hollowness that stretched behind us along the fog-covered road. For weeks afterward, I couldn't stop thinking about that night. Driving anywhere alone, I checked every shadow along the roadside, every mile marker, half expecting to see that same rigid posture, the pale, open-mouthed face, waiting, listening. Friends laughed when I told them, called it sleep deprivation, imagination running wild, but I know what I saw. I felt it, that sense of being measured, of being studied by something entirely human and entirely wrong, stays with me in ways I can't explain. Sometimes, when I close my eyes, I can still see him, standing beside the mile marker, his head tilted just enough to suggest he's listening for me, for us, for anyone foolish enough to drive those roads alone at night. And even when I've sworn off the back roads completely, part of me wonders if he's still out there, waiting, patient, unmoving, counting the hours until the next car passes and he can test them as he tested us. Even now, I can feel that night pressing down, the memory of fog swallowing the headlights, the unnatural stillness of his body, the way the forest seemed to lean closer with every turn. There is no explanation that makes sense, no story that fits, only the lingering fear, the knowledge that sometimes, in the quiet dark of the Appalachians, the road doesn't belong to the living, and the watchers among the trees do not need to speak to be heard. We never returned to that stretch. I avoid driving those back roads at night, avoiding bends where the fog sits thick, mile markers rising like sentinels from the black. But even when I stick to highways, I catch myself scanning the roadside, expecting him, expecting that pale face to emerge, the tilt of his head signaling that he knows I'm there, that he remembers, that he's still waiting. It's been months, maybe a year, and I still feel it in the pit of my stomach, the same sense I felt when we first slowed for him, a pressure in the chest, a chill at the base of the skull, a low hum in the bones that tells you something is watching, just out of reach. I've told myself it was a trick of the fog, of the night, of our exhaustion, but deep down, I know it wasn't. Something was there, and it knew we saw it, and it wanted us to know it was there. I don't talk about that night much. When I do, I leave out the details that make people scoff. The way he repeated, the same marker, the same posture, the impossibility of it. Only the pause, the unease, the words I can't fully explain. We weren't alone, not really, and the forest keeps its secrets better than any living soul could hope to. Even now, sometimes, I dream of that bend, of the fog curling tight around the headlights, of the road that seems to stretch forever. And in those dreams he is always there, silent, unmoving, tilting his head as if listening, and I wake with my heart racing, certain that one day, on some dark Appalachian back road, I will see him again, and there will be no way to escape. Story 3. The Motel with the Wrong Room. I'd been staying in my uncle's hunting cabin for a week, cut off by a snowstorm heavier than anything I'd seen before. The road in had been impossible, tires sliding over ice and packed snow, but I made it, mostly because the thought of a week alone in the forest with a stack of books and a fire roaring in the stove sounded like a blessing. The first couple of days were uneventful, just the wind rattling the eaves, the occasional crack of a tree limb falling in the distance, the soft pop and hiss of the wood stove. But by the third night, I started noticing something that made my stomach tighten every time I thought about it. The wind had taken on a rhythm. a cadence that almost sounded like voices. At first, I told myself it was nothing, just the way the snow shifted through the branches, how the frozen pines groaned and sighed, but there was a clarity to it, a rising and falling pitch that sometimes made it seem like words were being carried along with the gusts. I tried to ignore it, but the longer I stayed, the more I realized the sounds weren't always coming from the trees. Sometimes they were closer than anything that should have been possible outside the cabin walls. I'd wake in the middle of the night to faint murmuring, a soft, indistinct conversation that made my heart hammer. It was never loud, never aggressive, just deliberate. There was a pause in the room, a quiet that pressed against my ears, and then the murmuring would begin again. I couldn't make out words, but I knew it wasn't the wind. The fourth night, the storm had intensified, and I could see nothing beyond the frosted windows. I lay in bed, listening, tracing the pitch of the voices, trying to convince myself that it was some old recording of the wind or my own imagination. But then I noticed something else, the faint impression of footprints in the snow outside, half covered by drifting flakes circling the cabin. They were too neat, too deliberate to be random. Several pairs, as if someone had walked all the way around multiple times. None of them led away. I froze, staring through the frost. The rifle I'd brought along suddenly feeling impossibly heavy. My hands shook as I gripped it. The voices seemed to sense my attention. They grew softer, almost curious, like they were listening to me as much as I was to them. I debated going outside, telling myself I was imagining it all, that the footprints were old, covered by snow, but the urge to know, the need to see, overpowered my fear. I opened the door carefully, the wind cutting like knives against my face. The moment I stepped into the snow, the murmuring stopped. Silence fell so abruptly I thought the storm had paused with it. I moved slowly around the cabin, rifle ready, scanning the whiteness for movement, shadows, anything out of place. There was nothing, only the snow, pristine and glinting in the dim light of the moon breaking through the clouds. My breath came in short, cold bursts. I followed the footprints, but as I went, I realized they weren't actually leading anywhere. They looped around the cabin in tight circles back to where I had started. It made no sense. Someone would have had to walk in those circles endlessly, or perhaps they weren't meant to leave. I returned inside, heart still racing, the silence in the cabin pressing down on me. I stayed awake the rest of the night, sitting by the fire, listening for the voices, for the faint scrape of boots in the snow, for anything at all. But nothing came. Morning arrived grey and quiet, and with it the footprints were gone, erased as if the storm itself had swallowed them. I stepped outside to check, but there was only snow, unbroken except for the faint tracks I had made the night before. I thought it was over until I went into the living room to make coffee. That's when I saw it. A single line of wet boot prints leading from the door into the room. Not scuffed snow, but real, melting water on the wooden floor. They ended right at my chair, as if whoever, or whatever, had walked in hadn't intended to leave again. I backed away slowly, heart hammering, scanning the windows and corners of the room. Nothing moved, nothing breathed except me. I wanted to laugh, to tell myself I'd slipped in my own nerves, but the prints were too deliberate, too real. I spent the rest of the day on edge, pacing the cabin, peering into the trees, half expecting to see someone watching, waiting for night to fall again. When the storm finally subsided, I couldn't bring myself to leave immediately. I kept checking every shadow, every sound, convinced the prints would appear again, that the murmuring would return. But the snow outside was clean, the cabin silent, except for the occasional settling of the old wood. Even now, thinking back, I can still hear those voices in my memory, They weren't angry, weren't threatening, but they were patient, deliberate, as if whatever had been circling the cabin wasn't in any hurry. And the footprints? How could someone step through snow and then vanish, leaving a path inside that didn't belong? It's the kind of thing that lingers in your mind long after you've left the place, the kind of fear that doesn't end when the danger does. I never return to that cabin in the winter again. Every year I drive past the road that leads there, but only during daylight, only when the snow has melted and the trees look ordinary and safe. But sometimes, in the quiet evenings when the wind rises and carries the sound of something shifting in the distance, I think of that week trapped in the storm, and I swear I can hear them again, the faint, impossible murmuring, the soft scraping of boots that circle endlessly, that come in closer when you least expect it. I've told a few people about it, but most dismiss it as cabin fever, snow fatigue, imagination running wild. I used to try to explain it logically to myself too, until I realized logic doesn't hold up in a forest like that. Not when the wind carries voices, not when footsteps appear where no one should be able to walk, and not when you wake to find the evidence of someone's presence right where you sit. It's not a story to be solved. It's something you survive, something that presses into you and won't leave. Even now, when I'm alone in a quiet house, I check the corners of rooms and the space just beyond doors. I imagine the snowed-in cabin, the footprints circling, the cold wind carrying muted voices, and a shiver runs through me, and I think, with a dread I can't shake, that if I had stayed one night longer, I would have seen them, whoever they were, standing just beyond the frost on the windows, watching, waiting, patient as the snow falls and the world sleeps. There's no satisfying explanation, no neat ending, no story you can walk away from unshaken. All I know is what I felt, the isolation, the creeping awareness of being observed, the deliberate, measured footsteps, the voices that stopped the moment I tried to confront them. I can close my eyes and still see those prints ending at my chair, and I can still hear the murmuring that didn't come from the trees, and sometimes, I swear, I can feel them waiting, just beyond the edge of the wind, circling silently, patient, unending. Story 4. The pickup truck in the rear view. We had been driving for hours along a stretch of back road that seemed to stretch endlessly through the Appalachian hills, the forest on either side closing in like dark walls. It was past midnight, and the only light came from our headlights cutting through pockets of fog that drifted across the asphalt. Tom, my friend, kept squinting at the lines of trees, saying the road felt wrong, like it was stretching and folding on itself. I told him it was just the darkness playing tricks on our eyes, the monotony of the drive, but there was a heaviness in the air, a stillness that pressed in on the car, and I could feel it in my chest, a tight knot that wouldn't let go. Somewhere along a long, straight stretch, I noticed it. At first just a glimmer behind us, a pair of dull, yellow headlights. It looked like a pickup truck, old, rusted, the kind of vehicle that had probably been passed down through decades, barely maintained. At first, it was far behind, nothing to worry about, and I told myself it was just another late-night traveler. But over the next few miles, it didn't slow, didn't fall behind. Every time we veered off to a side road to check something or slowed down for a curve, it adjusted as well, keeping pace. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe the driver had gotten lost. Maybe he was heading to the same town. But there was something off. The truck seemed too precise in following us. The headlights didn't flicker like a human driving. They didn't hesitate at turns, didn't react to the winding slope of the road the way someone behind the wheel normally would. I tried telling myself it was a trick of the eyes, fog and fatigue combining to make me see patterns where there were none. Tom, sitting beside me, kept glancing at the rearview mirror, a tight frown on his face, his hand tapping nervously against his knee. "Man," he said finally, voice low, almost a whisper. "There's no one in it. I swear." I laughed nervously. "Come on, it's just the angle. Maybe tinted glass or the reflection. You're tired." But he shook his head. His eyes stayed fixed in the mirror, unblinking. I glanced myself, expecting to see the familiar outline of a driver, the vague movement of hands on the wheel. There was nothing. No one. The cab looked empty. "Maybe," I started, then stopped. I didn't want to say it aloud. The thought seemed absurd, impossible, but the way it followed, the precision of it was wrong. We continued driving, every bend in the road making the truck pull closer as if it had been following us all along, waiting for an opening. The forest around us seemed unnaturally quiet. No wind, no rustle of branches, no distant sound of wildlife. Only the tires humming over the asphalt and the occasional creak and groan of the pickup's suspension as it rolled behind us. We tried turning onto side roads, backtracking, even slowing to crawl under 20 miles per hour, hoping to see it fall behind, hoping to catch the illusion in motion. But it matched every maneuver. Every time we sped up, it did too, closing in until the glow of its yellow headlights became nearly oppressive in the rear view. Finally, approaching a sharp curve, I braced the steering wheel. I wanted to see who, or what, was driving, but as we rounded the bend, the truck passed us, moving with a strange, almost silent ease. And then I saw it clearly. The cab was empty. Not a driver, not a passenger. Nothing. Just the rusted frame, the faded paint, and the dull, unblinking glow of the lights. The suspension creaked as it leaned into the curve, a sound so human, so deliberate, that I thought for a moment it had weight, intent, and then it was gone, swallowed by the darkness, the trees, the fog, as if it had never existed. We didn't speak for a long while after that. The road seemed longer than ever, the silence pressing in, each mile stretching on like a test. My heart was still hammering, adrenaline making my hands shake. Tom kept glancing back, mouth slightly open, eyes wide with the same disbelief I felt. "I don't understand," he said finally. It had to have a driver. I know it. I wanted to comfort him. I wanted to say it was some trick of the road, the fog, the combination of exhaustion and the way the headlights caught on the snow and ice. But I couldn't. The memory of it was too vivid, too deliberate. The way the truck had moved, the way it had anticipated us, the impossible silence of the empty cab, it wasn't something that could be explained away. Hours later, when the first light of dawn broke through the mountains, we finally reached a main highway. I slowed, then stopped at a small diner to try and shake the memory. People moved around normally inside, sipping coffee, talking in ordinary voices. Outside, cars passed with the sound of engines and tires on asphalt. I kept checking the parking lot, half expecting to see the blue pickup roll past the diner, waiting for us to leave. But it never came. Even now, weeks later, I can't stop thinking about that night. Driving anywhere late at night. I catch myself checking the rear view, my hands tightening on the wheel whenever I see headlights following too closely. The image of that empty cab, the way it moved with an almost conscious precision, haunts me. I can't reconcile it with reality, can't fit it into anything I understand about the world. And that makes it worse, because the mind wants an explanation, wants a reason, but there isn't one. Sometimes, when the fog rises thick around the mountains, I swear I can hear the faint creak of suspension, the distant hum of an engine moving through the woods where no one should be, and the image of that rusted blue pickup, the way it seemed alive in its movements despite being empty, comes back to me with every turn of the wheel. The memory presses on me in a way I cannot shake, leaving a lingering doubt. That night, the road didn't belong entirely to us. Something else was there, patient, precise, watching, moving, yet invisible in every way that matters. I try not to drive those back roads at night anymore, stick to highways and towns, but I know it doesn't matter. The memory of that pickup lingers, and I know the forest keeps things like it. Things that move with intent, things that watch and follow, things that defy understanding. I don't know if I'll ever be able to explain it, and I don't know if I want to, but I will never forget the sound of the empty cab rounding that curve, the dull yellow lights sliding past, the quiet creak of something moving behind us when nothing should have been there. Even now, when I close my eyes, I can see it, following, patient, waiting for the night and the road to be empty again, and I can't shake the certainty that if I ever drove that way again, I wouldn't be able to escape it. The memory has a weight, a coldness, the same way the fog pressed against our car that night, and I know it will be with me for the rest of my life. The pickup was gone, but the feeling it left of being watched, of being pursued without a driver, without explanation, remains, and it is worse than any sight I've ever seen. It's impossible to reason with, impossible to chase off. It exists in the memory, in the silence of the night, in the empty spaces behind the wheel of a car on a road that should have been safe. We talk about it occasionally, Tom and I, each of us careful not to add details, not to sound hysterical. But the fear is still there, in the way we glance at every curve in the road at night, in the way the shadows between trees seem to shift too deliberately. We never saw it again, and maybe we never will. But I know it's out there, patient, waiting, and it doesn't need a driver to move, it doesn't need a reason, and it doesn't need an explanation. The memory is more than a story now. It's a warning I carry, a quiet dread that settles into my chest every time the night grows long and the roads grow empty. The pickup may have been gone, but it left behind something far heavier, the knowledge that some things in the Appalachians watch, follow, and move with a purpose we cannot understand. And sometimes the only choice we have is to keep moving, keep our eyes forward, and hope that whatever is behind us decides not to step into the light. Story 5. The Diner with No Morning. We were driving through a stretch of back road that seemed to go on forever, the fog so thick that it muffled the sound of our tires on the wet asphalt. The night had been long and quiet, nothing but the hum of the engine and the occasional call of a distant bird, and I was starting to think we might be completely lost. Tom, my friend, kept glancing at the sky, pointing out shapes in the fog, claiming he could see the outlines of hills that shouldn't have been there, and I nodded along, though I wasn't sure I believed him. Everything felt off, how the trees leaned closer than they should, how the road curved just enough to make me question if I'd been down this stretch before, even though I knew I hadn't. Somewhere just before dawn, a glow appeared through the grey veil of fog, warm and yellow, soft against the cold darkness around us. It was a diner, or at least it looked like one, the kind of roadside diner that promised coffee and greasy breakfast at any hour. The sign flickered faintly, the paint peeling, the letters worn down by years of sun and wind. I slowed the car instinctively, relief washing over me, imagining a cup of hot coffee and the comfort of a few minutes out of the cold, fogged night. We pushed open the door, and warmth hit us immediately, scented with coffee and fried food. The place was nearly empty, the tables clean but worn, the vinyl seats cracked along the seams. A jukebox in the corner played an old song, slowed somehow, off-tempo, stretching the notes in a way that made me uneasy, though I couldn't place why. A waitress appeared almost immediately, a thin woman in an apron, moving with quiet efficiency. She poured coffee into our mugs without asking, smiling politely, but her eyes never met ours. I had the sudden, strange sense that she already knew we were here, that she had been expecting us. We sat in near silence, sipping the bitter coffee, trying to shake the odd feeling creeping over me. The radio above the counter played more songs, each one dragging its notes out slowly, the rhythm uneven and just a little too deliberate. I glanced at the clock hanging above the counter, expecting the hands to move, expecting to see the minutes tick past. But they hadn't. They were frozen in place, the small hand pointing toward a time that no longer existed in our night. I shook my head and told myself I was imagining it, that exhaustion was twisting my sense of time, making the minutes feel like hours. Tom reached for the sugar and paused, staring at something behind me. I turned, expecting to see a fellow customer or maybe a waiter moving in the kitchen. But there was nothing, no one else. The diner seemed suspended in its own quiet bubble, a place out of time, untouched by the hours we had spent driving through the fog. The air had a weight to it, not oppressive exactly, but thick, deliberate, as if it was aware of us, as if it had been waiting for us to arrive. We ate our breakfast quietly, each of us lost in thought. I noticed the way the waitress moved, refilling our coffee cups almost mechanically, never speaking beyond her initial words. Her hands trembled just slightly, but it could have been my imagination. The room felt smaller than it should have, the corners slightly too dark, the light from the windows muted, as though the fog had followed us in and refused to leave. Every sound, the clink of silverware, the drip of the coffee machine, the slow scrape of the jukebox, seemed magnified in the stillness. Finally, when we were finished, I asked for the check. The waitress's smile remained polite, almost too perfect, and she said simply, "It isn't morning yet," without elaboration. I laughed nervously, thinking she was joking, but there was no trace of humor in her voice. Tom and I exchanged a glance, the kind that acknowledges something is off but can't quite be explained. I pushed the door open and stepped outside, expecting the road to continue where we had left it. Instead, the asphalt ahead was overgrown with weeds, thick and tall, bending under the weight of frost. The road had clearly not been driven in years, if ever. The fog hung low, heavier than before, curling around the edges of the clearing in a way that made it seem like the diner had grown out of the landscape itself, anchored in time and place that didn't belong to the world we knew. I called out, half expecting someone to answer, but the only sound was the distant hum of the forest waking. I looked back at the diner. The warm glow still shone from the windows, the faint outline of the waitress moving inside, refilling our cups as if we had never left. I wanted to step back inside, to confront her, to demand answers, but my feet wouldn't move. The fog seemed to press closer, almost forbidding, and something in me whispered that I wasn't meant to understand. We turned slowly, stumbling back to the car, the tires crunching on the frost and gravel as we sped away. Every glance in the rearview mirror confirmed the impossibility. The road we had come from no longer existed, overgrown and silent. The diner glowing faintly in the distance, as if it were suspended in its own dimension. The further we drove, the more the fog seemed to recede, and eventually the first light of dawn broke over the hills, pale and ordinary. But the image of that diner, of the frozen clock, of the waitress's polite, unblinking smile, stayed with me, pressing against the corners of my mind in a way I could not shake. For days afterward, I couldn't stop thinking about it. Driving anywhere at night, I checked every roadside diner, every glowing sign, half expecting to see it appear, to be swallowed again into the fog and suspended time. Friends laughed when I told them the story, called it fatigue, imagination, the fog playing tricks. But I know what I saw. I know the unnatural stillness of the place, the weight of its quiet, the way the waitress's hands moved without haste, as if she were following some schedule outside the laws of hours. Even now, I dream of the diner. I dream of stepping inside, feeling the warmth, smelling the coffee, hearing the slow, dragging music from the jukebox, the radio humming notes that never resolve. I dream of the clock above the counter, frozen in place, mocking the passage of time, and the polite smile of the waitress, waiting, patient. I wake with the same heavy knot in my chest, wondering if I have ever really left that road, or if it and the diner and the fog are still out there, waiting for the next travellers to stumble through the night. Unaware that the world outside is moving, and the diner inside has no morning. Even in the light of day, the memory presses on me. I can picture the overgrown road, the fog curling against the edges of the clearing, the impossibility of it all. I know the diner exists somewhere beyond reason, somewhere beyond the normal rules of time and space, and I know, though I will never speak it aloud, that if I ever find a long, empty stretch of road in the pre-dawn fog, I will be unable to resist stopping, unable to resist stepping inside, and I will feel that same strange, oppressive weight, knowing that inside it isn't morning yet, and perhaps it never will be. I have not returned to that region since. I do not drive back roads in the hours before dawn, and I avoid the fog wherever I can. But sometimes, when the light is dim and the road stretches endlessly ahead, I swear I can feel that suspended time pressing against my mind, hear the faint hum of the jukebox, the soft scrape of a chair against a worn floor, and see that polite smile staring without eyes, knowing that the diner is waiting for me, and it is still not morning. Story 6. The Woman Walking in the Rain. The rain had been coming down in sheets all evening, drumming on the roof of the car, running in rivulets down the windshield, and turning the back roads into slick ribbons of black and silver. Tom and I were trying to make our way back to the main highway after a night of camping deeper in the Appalachian woods than we probably should have been, and I kept squinting through the wipers, wishing the storm would let up even a little. The forest around us was dense, the trees dripping and swaying, shadows stretching across the road in ways that made me flinch every time a branch scraped the roof. Every now and then, a distant flash of lightning illuminated a clearing or a bend in the road, revealing the wet, endless tangle of trees beyond. The road felt wrong, longer, tighter, like it had been stretched by the fog. But I told myself I was tired, that the rain was playing tricks on my eyes. Somewhere near the middle of a particularly dark stretch, I first saw her. A figure on the shoulder of the road, wet hair plastered to her face, and a pale dress clinging to her frame in the downpour. At first I thought it might be another camper, someone foolish enough to be out in this weather, or maybe a stranded hiker. She was walking away from us, slow and steady, feet disappearing into the muddy shoulder. I slowed the car instinctively, lowering the window slightly to ask if she needed a ride, but as I opened my mouth, I realized I couldn't hear my own words over the rain, and by the time I could, she had turned her head just enough to look past us into the woods. There was no acknowledgement, no motion of her lips, nothing human in the gesture. My stomach sank a little. "She's weird," Tom muttered, voice low, tense. "Maybe she's lost." I nodded, though I didn't feel comforted. There was something about her presence, about the way she carried herself in the rain, that felt deliberate, almost waiting. I tried to shake it off, focusing on the slick black asphalt and the yellow lines, trying to convince myself it was nothing, just a soaked stranger wandering along a country road. A few minutes later, past a bend that I swear we hadn't turned around for, she appeared again. This time, she was walking toward us. I blinked, certain I had misjudged the first sighting, but no. She was coming directly down the middle of the muddy shoulder, her wet dress clinging to her, her long hair dripping, her face still half hidden. I swerved slightly to give her space, heart hammering in my chest. I could feel the car tense, the tires threatening to lose grip on the slick surface. "Tom," I said, voice tight. "Do you see her?" He nodded, pale, gripping the door handle. Yeah, how? We didn't turn around. I lowered the window again, rain whipping in, plastering my hair to my forehead. Hey, I called, voice raised over the storm. Do you need a ride? She didn't respond. Not a word, not a glance. She didn't even acknowledge our presence, except for that same gaze past us, into the trees where the shadows pressed against one another. I followed her eyes for a moment, trying to see what she was looking at, but all I could make out was the rain-soaked tangle of branches and the dim grey of the storm beyond. When I glanced back into the rearview mirror, my stomach dropped. She was gone. The space she had occupied just a moment before was empty. No footprints pressed into the muddy shoulder, no blur of movement, nothing. The road behind us stretched on, empty, the trees swaying silently in the downpour, and yet I could feel her absence, heavy and deliberate, pressing in. Tom didn't say anything at first. He just kept his eyes glued to the road ahead, fists tightening on the wheel. I tried to focus on driving, on the rain, on anything rational, but it was impossible. The image of her walking toward us, her wet hair plastered, that unflinching gaze, it clung to my mind like a shadow I couldn't shake. We continued in silence, the road bending and twisting through the hills. Every now and then, I thought I saw her again, fleeting glimpses through the sheets of rain, a pale flicker between trees, the glint of wet hair in the headlights, the subtle sway of a dress that shouldn't have been there. But every time I blinked, it vanished, leaving only the storm and the trees. By the time we reached a small clearing where the road widened and the forest thinned, the rain had lightened to a drizzle, but the unease remained. I dared to glance in the mirror again, half expecting, half hoping she wouldn't be there, but the road was empty. No figure, no motion, nothing except the wet asphalt stretching back into the folds of fog and trees. Maybe she just ran off into the woods, I suggested, though I didn't sound convinced even to myself. Tom shook his head. No, that doesn't make sense. Where would she have gone? We didn't pass a trail or a road or anything, just trees. I didn't answer. I didn't know what to say. Every instinct in me screamed that whatever we had seen wasn't simply a lost woman wandering in the rain. There was a deliberate quality to her presence. The way she appeared, disappeared, and reappeared without any logical path. The rest of the drive was quiet, each of us lost in our own thoughts. Every turn of the road made me flinch, expecting to see her again, standing between the trees, watching us pass. But she didn't appear. Not again. Not as we reached the faint lights of a distant town, the smell of damp asphalt replaced by something less raw, more ordinary. Even now, thinking back on it, the memory presses on me. The rain, the cold slickness of the road, the way her hair clung to her face. The gaze that didn't acknowledge us but pierced through the storm. All of it stays. I try to reason it away. Sleep deprivation, fog playing tricks, someone else's prank, but every rational explanation feels hollow. The way she vanished, the impossibility of her movements, the deliberate stillness of her eyes. It defies logic in a way that keeps me awake some nights. I never drove that stretch of road again at night, and I avoid back roads in storms whenever possible. But sometimes, when the rain drags across the trees and the fog rolls low over the hills, I swear I can see her just beyond the edge of my vision, standing there, long hair plastered, pale dress clinging, gazing past me into something I cannot see, waiting, patient, impossible. And I know with a sinking certainty that she is still out there somewhere, walking in the rain, moving through the woods, patient and silent, waiting for the next car, the next travellers, the next eyes to catch her for just long enough to know she isn't ordinary, and to realize that the world is far stranger than it should be. Story 7, The Bridge with No End. We were driving late at night. The kind of late where the world seems to shrink to the circle of headlights cutting through black. The road had narrowed as we approached the bridge, twisting between steep embankments and dark water that I couldn't see but could hear, the low murmur of it creeping under the boards. Tom, sitting beside me, kept his eyes on the trees, saying they seemed to lean closer as we drove, their branches clawing at the fog that had rolled in thick and sudden. I laughed nervously, tried to dismiss it, but even as I gripped the wheel tighter, the hairs on the back of my neck refused to lie down. The bridge came into view slowly, its old wooden planks glinting dimly in the weak beams of the headlights. It was narrow, barely wide enough for one car, with guardrails on either side that looked rotted and uneven. As we drove onto it, the first thing I noticed was how the light seemed to vanish into black. Not the black of night exactly, but a heavy, almost physical darkness that swallowed everything beyond the headlights. The planks rattled under our tires, and the sound echoed, long and hollow, as if the bridge itself was groaning. I told myself it was just old wood, that the storm and damp had made it rickety, but there was something deliberate in the way the boards shivered beneath us. I checked the GPS, expecting to see our location updating. The screen had frozen. The small blue dot stuck exactly where we had entered the bridge. I glanced at the clock. 30 minutes had passed since we first rolled onto the bridge, yet the mile markers hadn't changed. The water below seemed to stretch endlessly, a black mirror reflecting nothing, and the trees on either side were motionless, perfectly still, leaning in like spectators to a slow, impossible trick. Tom shifted beside me, unease written on his face. This doesn't make sense, he whispered. We should have crossed by now. I wanted to reassure him, to force myself to believe it was a lapse in perception, fatigue, the fog twisting the familiar into the unfamiliar, but every instinct in me screamed that this wasn't normal, that the bridge itself had become something else, something suspended between time and reason, minutes stretched into what felt like hours, the rattling of the planks, the soft groan of the guardrails, and the hum of our tires on wet wood became a rhythm, hypnotic and oppressive. I dared to look at the edges of the bridge, expecting to see the bank of the river or the continuation of road. There was nothing, only black water, black trees, and the faint glimmer of fog that seemed to pulse with its own slow heartbeat. Then, far ahead, a light appeared. At first, I thought it was another car, a beacon signaling the end of the bridge, or maybe a small farmhouse just past the crossing. Relief surged through me. Finally, a point to aim for, an anchor to bring us back to the world of normal roads and solid ground. But as we drove closer, the light didn't change, didn't grow or shift as it should have. Instead, it remained distant, stubbornly fixed, as if refusing to let us reach it. I slowed, squinting, heart hammering. Tom leaned forward, brow furrowed. That's not right, he said, voice tight. It's not getting any closer. And then, with a horrible clarity, I realized what had happened. The bridge wasn't ending. It didn't have an end. We were still on the same stretch of road, the same planks rattling beneath us, the same rotted guardrails stretching into a darkness that had no boundaries. The mile marker I had passed a half hour ago was there again, framed perfectly in the headlights, staring at us as if to mock our attempts at progress. Panic crept in, subtle at first, then climbing into a sharp, suffocating edge. I slammed my hands on the wheel, desperate to turn, to force some change, but the bridge didn't bend, didn't curve. Every attempt to navigate seemed to reset us, placing us back at the same point. Tom's hands were trembling now, gripping the dash. We've been here before, he said, voice almost breaking. I swallowed hard, trying to force myself to stay calm, to analyze, to make sense of it, but there was no logic. The bridge defied all reasoning. The rattling planks beneath us, the unyielding black water, the mile marker. It was all the same, unchanging, unyielding. I wanted to scream, to throw the car into reverse and hope some motion would break the cycle, but even that felt futile. Hours, or maybe minutes, I couldn't tell, passed in a fog of fear. The sound of rain tapping against the windshield, the soft hum of tires on wood, and the groan of the old bridge became all-encompassing. I caught myself staring at the reflections in the water, imagining movement just beneath the surface. Shadows that weren't there a moment ago, ripples that shouldn't have formed without wind. My mind tried to explain it. Exhaustion, storm fatigue, fog playing tricks. But deep down, I knew explanation wouldn't help. This was something else, something patient, something that didn't obey the rules we were accustomed to. Finally, we reached the lights again, that same fixed, distant glow, unwavering, impossible. I braced for the relief that never came, only to see the bridge end abruptly in black void. No road continued, no sign of civilization, nothing but the same mile marker staring at us through the windshield. The headlights reflected off the planks as we coasted to a stop, the engine ticking softly in protest. I could hear Tom's shallow breathing beside me, the fear so raw it filled the cabin of the car, pressing against my chest, clawing at my ribs. I wanted to get out, to run, to throw myself into the darkness to escape the endless bridge, but my legs wouldn't move. My mind couldn't reconcile what I was seeing. Every step outside the car seemed pointless. The water, the trees, the fog, it all felt infinite, swallowing everything, looping us back to the same impossible point. Eventually, in some desperate attempt at action, I slammed the car into reverse, steering wildly, trying to break free of the bridge's impossible cycle. But no matter how fast we moved, no matter the direction, we ended up back at the same mile marker, the same planks rattling beneath us, the same hollow groan of guardrails. Panic became a steady pulse in my veins, a rhythm that matched the eerie cadence of the bridge itself. Tom's voice, shaking and low, finally broke the silence. "We're trapped. It's not ending." I wanted to argue, to find reason, but I couldn't. The evidence pressed in too hard. I could feel it in the way the wood beneath the tires seemed endless, the way the fog swallowed everything, the way the mile marker mocked our attempts at escape. The bridge had no end. It wasn't part of the world as we understood it. Somewhere in the distant dark, past the horizon of my headlights, I saw movement, subtle, almost imperceptible, like a ripple in reality itself. I couldn't tell if it was the water, a shadow of the trees, or something else. And in that moment I understood that the bridge had a will, a patience, and perhaps an awareness. It had been waiting for us, guiding us, looping us, testing us, keeping us on the planks where it wanted us, and maybe keeping others too. When dawn finally arrived, thin and pale, spilling weak light across the tops of the trees, we somehow found ourselves back on the road leading to the highway, the bridge gone behind us, as if it had never existed. The mile marker, the rickety planks, the endless black water, they were gone, leaving only the memory, heavy and lingering. We didn't speak, didn't try to rationalize. The memory pressed against us in quiet, oppressive weight, a reminder that some roads in the mountains are not meant to be crossed, some bridges not meant to be completed. Even now, weeks later, I think about that night every time I drive through the backroads. Every narrow bridge, every stretch of dark water, every mile marker that seems familiar. It all brings a creeping doubt, a quiet dread that maybe the bridge is still out there, waiting for the next traveler, patient, endless, unyielding, and impossible to escape. And though I tell myself it was exhaustion, fog, the stretch of road playing tricks, I can't shake the feeling that the bridge is somewhere out there, existing outside of time and space, a loop with no end, and that if we had stopped for even a moment longer, we might still be there, drifting on the planks forever, headlights swallowed by black, staring at the same mile marker in endless silence. Story 8. The Camper in the Gravel. But we were driving along a back road that seemed to stretch forever, gravel crunching under the tires, when the sky overhead began to darken with storm clouds, heavy and low. It was one of those late afternoons in the mountains where the light seems to sink too fast, shadows creeping into every dip of the road, and the forest pressing close like it wanted to swallow the world whole. Tom and I had been on the road for hours, stopping occasionally for gas or to stretch, and we were both tired. Our conversation reduced to short, clipped sentences, punctuated by the hum of the engine and the occasional bird call fading into the distance. Somewhere past a bend, I spotted it. A camper, old and faded, parked alone in a gravel lot beside the road. It was the kind that looked like it hadn't moved in years, paint chipped and rust eating at the seams. The windows were dark, except for a faint flicker inside that made me squint and wonder if a candle or an old lantern had been left burning. The place was utterly silent, nothing but the soft patter of rain beginning to fall on the roof of the camper, a light mist rolling in from the surrounding woods. Tom nudged me, his eyes wide with a mixture of excitement and unease. "Go on." "Knock," he said, half laughing, half serious, the kind of dare that carries a whisper of fear underneath. I hesitated, feeling a weight settle in my stomach. The instinct to turn the car round and leave suddenly strong, but pride, or maybe foolish curiosity, won out. I stepped out, the gravel crunching beneath my boots, the mist curling around my legs, and I walked to the camper. The air smelled of wet earth and rotting leaves, the kind of smell that sticks to your clothes and hair. I raised my hand and knocked on the door. The wood was cold and slick with rain. At first, nothing happened. Then, slowly the door creaked open just a fraction, the hinges groaning like a sigh, revealing only a single rocking chair moving gently back and forth. No one was visible. The faint flicker of light from inside danced across the walls, casting elongated shadows that seemed to stretch and twitch just at the edge of my vision. My heart beat hard in my chest, loud and hollow in the quiet lot. A smell drifted out of the camper, wood smoke mixed with damp earth, the kind of aroma that makes your stomach tighten with both comfort and unease. I called out, my voice trembling slightly, asking if anyone was there. And the rocking chair continued its slow, steady motion, unaccompanied by any sound of footsteps or reply. Tom's voice carried from the edge of the lot, urging me to hurry back to the car, but I found myself rooted to the gravel, staring at the rocking chair as it moved with an almost deliberate rhythm. Then, without warning, the door swung shut on its own, cutting off the dim light and muffling the smell for just a moment before it settled into the still air. The rocking chair stopped instantly, and in that silence, the gravel lot felt impossibly large, the trees pressing in from all sides. I stepped back, my boots sliding slightly on the wet stones, and I could feel the tension in my chest building, a slow, suffocating pressure that made it hard to breathe. Tom came closer, his flashlight cutting through the mist. "What the hell?" he started, but the words died in his throat when he saw the door, now closed as if it had never been open at all. We exchanged a look, both of us feeling that uneasy certainty that this was no ordinary camper, no abandoned lot waiting for us to stumble upon it. It was something else entirely, something patient, watching. I wanted to leave, to get back in the car and drive until the fog swallowed us completely, but my feet felt heavy. I could still see the faint flicker through the wood, though the windows appeared solid now, dark and unbroken. The air was heavy, carrying that strange mix of damp earth and smoke, thick and lingering. I called out again, louder this time, but the only response was the distant drip of rain from the camper's roof and the soft rustle of leaves in the approaching storm. We finally backed away, stumbling over gravel and roots, the mist curling around our ankles until we reached the car. I kept glancing over my shoulder, expecting to see the rocking chair move again, expecting some sign that it had followed us or was still there, patient and waiting, but nothing, only the lot, empty and silent, with the faint glimmer of the camper in the mist. Tom climbed in, shaking slightly. "Let's just go," he said, voice tight, eyes wide. I started the engine, the car rumbling in protest against the wet gravel, and we drove off slowly, the camper shrinking in the rearview mirror, the mist swallowing it until it was gone entirely. For the rest of the night, we drove in silence. Every shadow on the side of the road seemed alive. Every flicker of light between the trees felt deliberate, watching. My mind kept replaying the camper, the rocking chair, the smell of wood smoke and wet earth, and that impossible stillness that felt almost intelligent, aware of our presence. Sleep didn't come easily that night, and when it finally did, the dreams were filled with the creak of a rocking chair, the smell of damp wood, the faint flicker of light in the darkness, patient and unyielding. Even now, weeks later, I can't drive past gravel lots without thinking of it. Every old camper, every dark window, every faint flicker of light makes my heart pound in a familiar rhythm, that sense of being watched and waited for. I tell myself it was abandoned, that we were just seeing shadows and reflections, but deep down, I know there was something more, something that didn't belong in the ordinary world. And sometimes, late at night, I swear I can feel the slow, deliberate creak of a chair rocking somewhere just beyond the edge of vision, waiting, patient, unmoving yet impossibly alive. Story 9. The rest stop that wasn't there. We had been driving for hours, the mountains stretching around us in endless folds of shadow and fog. It was the kind of night where the road seems to narrow with every bend, where the trees lean close and whisper against each other in the wind, and the radio only crackles with static when it isn't playing old songs that sound slower than they should. Tom was behind the wheel, hands tight on the steering wheel, and I was slouched in the passenger seat, half asleep, half watching the dim glow of headlights cut through the mist. Our coffee had long run out, and both of us were craving something hot, something normal. Then we saw it, a rest area, brightly lit, almost impossibly clean in the middle of miles of twisting road. The fluorescent lights flickered just enough to give everything a warm, sterile glow. I blinked at it, certain we'd imagined it at first, and Tom slowed the car instinctively, muttering, "Well, guess it's time for a break." We pulled in, tires crunching on perfectly swept gravel, and for a moment it felt like an oasis. Inside, everything was perfect. The bathrooms were spotless, the kind of clean you don't see at roadside stops, with fresh paper towels and no smell of anything but disinfectant. Vending machines hummed softly, stocked with snacks we didn't recognize. Even the coffee smelled stronger than usual, rich and inviting. A lone attendant moved quietly behind the counter, nodding as we poured our cups, her smile polite but distant, as if she had always been there, always expecting us. The kind of smile that doesn't reach your eyes. We sipped the coffee, stretching our legs, trying to shake off the fatigue that had made the road feel endless. But as I glanced out the large windows toward the highway, a cold prickle ran down my spine. There were no other cars, no trucks rumbling past, no distant headlights, nothing but the road stretching away into black, empty mountains. The wind outside carried no sound except for the faint whistle of it through trees. It was wrong. "Where is everybody?" I asked quietly, and Tom didn't answer at first. He just frowned, leaning forward to look out the window. "I don't know," he said finally. "I thought we'd see traffic. Even out here, someone should be passing." We stayed a little longer, uneasily sipping coffee, feeling the hum of the vending machines and the distant drip of a faucet in the bathroom somehow louder in the stillness. When we finally left, the fluorescent lights seemed to flicker in farewell, and we both felt a reluctant chill. The road back to the highway was just as empty, the fog pressing close, the mountains like silent watchers on either side. Neither of us spoke for several miles, each lost in that quiet unease. The next morning, when the sun had finally risen and the mist had burned off, I pulled out my phone to check the map. Tom leaned over my shoulder as I zoomed in along the stretch of road we had driven the night before, and then nothing. No rest stop, not even a tiny pull-off. No markers, no signs, nothing that could account for what we'd just seen. "I swear, there was a rest area," Tom said, voice tight. "Right there. Bright lights, bathrooms, coffee." "I know," I said, feeling my stomach twist. I don't know what we saw." We retraced the road in daylight, scanning the edges for gravel lots, old buildings, anything that could have been the place we stopped. There was nothing. Just the black asphalt winding between the mountains, the trees stretching endlessly, and the occasional creek reflecting the sun. Nothing to explain the fluorescent lights, the perfect cleanliness, the hum of machines, or the presence of someone behind the counter. Weeks later, I still think about that stop. Sometimes, late at night, when I drive through the foggy mountains, I imagine it there, bright and perfect, waiting silently. The smell of fresh coffee in the air, the faint hum of machines, and the distant, impossible quiet. The thought makes my skin crawl, that a place could exist on the edge of the road for only a moment, only to vanish, leaving you wondering if you imagined it entirely, or if it had been waiting for someone else, patient and unseen, in the endless Appalachian night. Story 11. The car that matched. We had been driving for hours along the back roads leading up to the state line, the kind of roads that twist through hills and forests with blind curves and overgrown shoulders. The sun had long dipped behind the mountains, and the headlights of our car barely cut through the thickening gloom. I was in the passenger seat, leaning against the window, tired and trying to keep my eyes open, while Tom gripped the wheel with an intensity I hadn't seen all day. The radio was low, playing static between songs, and the only sound other than the tires on asphalt was the occasional rush of wind and the far-off call of an owl somewhere in the trees, somewhere just before the state line. I noticed it. Another car in our lane, just a few 100 feet behind us. At first, I thought it was coincidence, just another traveler on these lonely roads. But the closer I looked, the more the unease grew. The color was exactly the same as ours, the same deep blue that had taken years to keep from fading, the same dent in the rear fender from that time I had hit the mailbox. My stomach sank. I nudged Tom, pointing silently, and his eyes flicked to the rearview mirror. "Are you seeing what I'm seeing?" I whispered. He swallowed hard. "Yeah," he said, his voice low. That's impossible." The car followed us at a steady distance, never passing, never falling back. I tried to convince myself it was someone coincidentally driving a similar model. The dent, a trick of the light, but every detail matched too perfectly. Tom suggested we pull over to let it pass, thinking that perhaps, if we stopped, it would continue on its way. We eased onto the shoulder, heartbeats loud in our chests. As soon as we slowed to a stop, the other car also stopped, a few dozen feet behind us, engine idling silently. We sat in tense silence, the headlights cutting through the fog beginning to gather at the edges of the road. I could see the driver's window roll down slowly, and my throat went dry. But when I squinted, I saw nothing, no one in the driver's seat. The seat was empty, perfectly still, as if waiting. The hair on my arms stood on end, and for the first time all day, the sense of being watched pressed down like a physical weight. Tom muttered something I couldn't hear, and then hit the accelerator, urging us back onto the road. The car mirrored every movement, staying exactly the same distance behind us, matching our speed as though it were tethered to our own. My stomach churned, a mix of fear and disbelief, twisting into something deeper, more primal. Every curve, every hill we crested, it stayed there, and I could feel its presence, patient and persistent, though impossibly empty. We drove faster, heartbeats drumming in our ears, the road a blur under the headlights. I glanced at the rearview mirror again, still there, still perfect. The same dent, the same dull glint of paint. The fact that the driver's side was empty made it somehow worse. It wasn't chasing us in the way another car might. It wasn't trying to overtake or intimidate. It simply existed in tandem with us, an eerie reflection following rules that made no sense. The darkness pressed closer as the miles slipped by, and I realized the woods on either side seemed to lean toward the road, trees bending in shadow as if to watch. The fog thickened, curling across the pavement in curling fingers, but the other car remained visible, a constant, unnatural twin. We passed abandoned farms and silent houses, their windows staring like blind eyes, and the other car continued, faithful and unwavering. By the time we reached the outskirts of the next town, our nerves were frayed, every second stretching painfully long. I could feel the sweat on my forehead and the tight ache in my jaw, gripping the seat like it was the only thing keeping me anchored to reality. Then, as we entered the town limits, the car was simply gone, vanished. I scanned every street we passed, every intersection, every side road, but it had disappeared as though it had never been there at all. Tom let out a long, shaky breath. "Did you see that?" he asked, voice trembling. I nodded, unable to speak, mind racing with questions that had no answers. Who or what had been driving that car? Why did it follow us so perfectly? How had it disappeared without a trace? Even now, I can feel that weight in the pit of my stomach when I think about it, the empty presence behind us, patient and deliberate. For days afterward, I kept checking the driveway at home, half expecting to see it there, parked silently, waiting. I avoided looking in mirrors when driving, afraid I might catch a glimpse of it again. Even telling the story feels unreal, like recounting a dream I shouldn't remember. But I know what I saw, the car that matched ours, following in the night, empty and patient, a reflection of ourselves in motion, and gone before anyone else could witness it. And sometimes, on lonely backroads in the mountains, when the mist rolls low and the headlights cut through the trees in long, narrow beams, I swear I can see it there again, matching my movements perfectly, silent, empty, waiting. The thought is a quiet, gnawing dread that never leaves, a reminder that some parts of the road exist outside of ordinary logic, and some things follow you not to harm, but simply because they can. Story 1. The gas station with no attendant. We'd been on the road since early evening, winding our way through the back roads of Appalachia after taking a wrong turn near the state line. The GPS kept cutting out, and the fog had grown so thick it seemed to swallow the beams of my headlights before they reached the asphalt. My friend, Tom, sat slouched in the passenger seat, eyes half shut, every so often muttering directions that didn't make sense. I'd stopped trusting the map on my phone 2 hours earlier. Out here, There were no cell towers, no towns, just endless black woods pressing in from both sides. By the time the fuel light came on, my nerves were already frayed. The road had been empty for miles, no houses, no signs. Not even the glow of distant porch lights through the trees. Then, through the fog, I saw it. A small gas station, the kind that looks like it hadn't been updated since the 70s. One flickering bulb swung over the pumps, casting an uneven circle of light onto the cracked pavement. No other cars. No sound except for the faint metallic creak of the sign swaying above us. I pulled in, relieved just to stop moving. The pump looked ancient. No card reader, just a slot for bills. I figured I'd have to go inside to pay. Tom stayed in the car while I walked toward the door. The glass was fogged over from the inside, and the weak fluorescent light made the shelves beyond look like rows of crooked teeth. The bell above the door gave a half-hearted jingle when I stepped in. The air inside was stale, heavy with the smell of burnt coffee and something else. Something faintly sour, like wet cardboard. The place was deserted. Half the shelves were empty, the other half stocked with dusty cans and faded snack wrappers. A pot of coffee sat on the counter, blackened and thick, like it had been sitting there for days. I called out, "Hello? Anyone here?" My voice sounded too loud in the stillness. No answer. That's when I noticed the register. The drawer was open, coins scattered across the counter and onto the floor. One of the quarters had rolled just far enough to catch in a crack between the tiles. It looked like someone had left in the middle of a sale, or maybe in the middle of counting the till. I felt a ripple of unease work its way up my spine. Still, I was tired, low on gas, and figured maybe the attendant had just stepped into the back. I called again, louder this time, but the only reply was the low hum of the fluorescent lights. I turned to wave for Tom to come in, but he was standing outside the car now, leaning slightly forward, eyes fixed on something just beyond the pool of light from the bulb. His face looked strange, mouth slightly open, lips pale. "What?" I called. He didn't answer, just shook his head slowly, as if telling me not to ask. When I stepped closer to the doorway, I could see the way his shoulders were drawn up, like he was bracing against cold, though the air was still and warm. His voice, when it came, was low, tight. "We need to go. Now!" I glanced past him into the darkness. There was nothing there, just the same wall of fog, dense and featureless. But the way he wouldn't take his eyes off it made my skin prickle. "What is it?" I asked, though I wasn't sure I wanted the answer. Tom shook his head again, sharper this time. "Get in the car." I don't know why I didn't argue. Maybe it was the tone of his voice or the strange heaviness in the air, as if something out there was holding its breath. I walked quickly back to the car, feeling a pressure in the base of my skull, an instinct telling me not to turn my back on that stretch of fog. Tom was already in the passenger seat by the time I slid behind the wheel. I started the engine, the sound startlingly loud in the silence, and pulled away from the pumps. For a few seconds, I kept my eyes straight ahead, but curiosity got the better of me, and I glanced in the mirror. I wish I hadn't. In the rear view, the gas station looked wrong. The light from the bulb barely reached the pavement now, as though it had dimmed the moment we left. And just at the edge of that shrinking glow, I thought I saw a shape. Tall, still, almost blending into the fog. No face, no features, just an outline that didn't move even as we turned the corner and it vanished from view. Tom didn't say a word for the next 10 miles, and neither did I. It wasn't until we reached the faint glow of a distant town that he finally spoke, his voice so quiet I almost missed it. "It wasn't looking at me," he said. "It was looking past me, like it was waiting for you to come back. We didn't stop until morning. I never asked him to explain what he saw, and he never offered. But sometimes, when I'm driving at night and the fog rolls in thick around the headlights, I think about that place. And I wonder if it's still there, waiting for someone else to run low on gas."